Chapter 16. Phil is the first to step on shore. His face is pale, his movements hesitant and careful as his boots crunch down onto land, or, well, bone. It snaps sickeningly beneath his heels, and Phil's whole face twists in disgust and revulsion, growing more and more ghostly white by the second. Technoblade is quick to follow, though the rest of the crew aren't so certain, lingering as long as they can in the safety of the dinghy. The fuck is this? Tommy is the first to break the silence. I don't... Phil's brow furrows. It wasn't like this before. What the hell? No, it wasn't. Wilbur agrees, not far behind them, looking just as concerned. It was beautiful. Golden shores and jewels just like the stories said. Well, it is cursed, Technoblade mutters half-heartedly. I don't think a cursed island has to play by the rules of, well, anything. He can't deny the flicker of unease in his chest, though. The island is unsettling, from the eerie silence to the constant snap and crackle beneath his feet. He tries not to look down. It doesn't help. The island is truly made of bone, as far as the eye can see, which isn't far, not with the dense fog surrounding them at every turn. Stay close, he orders the crew. Don't split up from the group. We don't know what could be out there. At that, Tommy pulls just a little closer to Ronbu and Tubbo, his bravado faltering. Technoblade is quickly finding himself regretting bringing the kids along, regretting putting them in danger. He's not sure what they're going to face out there, but he's guessing it won't be as simple as just returning the locket to its home. Judging by the look on Phil's face, his friend senses it as well. Any semblance of false hope is gone, his brows furrowed and his eyes narrowed in determination, his hand resting comfortably near the holster of his pistol. As the two of them lead the way into the fog, Technoblade sticks so close his shoulder bumps against Phil's. You okay? He asks softly. I'll be better when this is all finally over, Phil admits, not meeting his gaze. Technoblade pointedly bumps their shoulders together again, not missing the way Phil leans into the touch. He doesn't fight it, taking just as much comfort from the gesture as his friend. We'll get through this, Phil, he murmurs. Phil meets his gaze, and any semblance of false bravado is gone. Instead of the reckless confidence he's come to treasure, Technoblade can see nothing but terror amidst the blue. Will we? He questions, and his voice is so rasping and fragile that Technoblade's heart aches. He looks like a child, lost and confused and scared, and Technoblade wishes all this was already over, if only to see his best friend's smile and reckless bravado return. But he'll settle for what he has. We will, he vows. You and me. We'll break this damned curse, and then we'll burn this island down right along with it. Phil's lips twitch into a weak smile. To the gates of hell, huh, mate? He teases softly, and Technoblade's cheeks burn pink at the memory of his fierce profession of loyalty. I think we're already there, he says, giving Phil a little shove. Don't make me regret it, old man. An hour into their aimless wandering, they come across a skeleton. Leaned up against a pile of bones, it's nothing of importance at first. At least, not until it moves. It's just a twitch at first. An odd rattle that didn't come from a bone being crunched beneath the heel of a boot. Nobody notices, save for one. Somewhere at the back of the pack, Tommy lets out a shriek, high-pitched and terrified, jumping backward so violently Tubbo and Ronbu have to brace him. What the fuck? Tommy spits, gesturing wildly at the skeleton they'd passed. Technoblade blinks. The skeleton is still and unmoving, its head cocked at a funny angle, its hands resting on its lap. It looks, for all intents and purposes, like a perfectly normal skeleton. "You all right, mate?" Phil questions, one brow raised. "It's just a skeleton, Tommy, like all the others." "It moved!" Tommy hisses accusingly. His eyes narrowed as he shakes Tubbo and Ronbu's hands free of his shoulders. "I fucking saw it!" Technoblade eyes it, doubtfully. "I don't think it's moved in a long time," he mutters, stepping closer and waving a hand in front of the motionless skull. "Looks pretty dead to me." "Don't patronize me, dickhead." "Tommy, don't you think first time in the bone zone?" Phil's mouth snaps shut. "Who said that?" Technoblade asks, glancing around at the crew. It hadn't been a voice he recognized, but they're all on their own out here, so it had to have been... "Me, bonehead." The skeleton is moving. The skeleton is moving. Not only that, it's speaking, waving to them as it pushes itself up from the ground with a rattle and a creak. It stumbles a little, swaying almost drunkenly before righting itself. There's an assortment of gasps and shouts and obscenities as the crew backs away from the unseemly sight, and Technoblade's own gut lurches in an odd mixture of horror and complete and utter confusion as he ponders this newest development. And then it kicks in. Right. Cursed Island. That's right. The skeleton turns toward him with a cackling laugh, its jaw unhinging and nearly popping out of place with the force of its laughter. "No rules here, pal. Who needs a brain or a heart anyway?" "Wait a second," Phil says, and Technoblade watches as he steps forward to get a closer look at the skeleton. They eye each other up for a moment, and he can see the way Phil's eyes linger on the stranger's ragged clothes and the axe at his hip bone. And then Phil gasps, his eyes widening as he takes a step back, and behind him, Wilbur looks like he's seen a ghost. Charles, mate, is that you?" The skeleton laughs. "Glad to see you still recognize me, Captain. I was wondering if you would." "Oh, gods," Phil says, looking equally amazed and sickened. "What the hell? Mate, you're a skeleton. And you're alive." "Nope," the skeleton says brightly. "Dead as dead can be." He thumps his empty ribcage, right over the spot a heart should be. "Went down with the ship, just like the others." "Oh." "Hey, it's not so bad. I don't get hungry, I don't get sick, but sometimes I do get this awful rattle in my chest." As if to prove his point, Charles gives a hearty laugh, and his ribs rattle like some morbid maraca. Phil looks sick, even as the skeleton dissolves into more raucous laughter. "Phil, you know this skeleton?" "Yeah." His friend croaks weakly. "He was part of my crew. Before we sank like a stone." The skeleton guffaws, clutching at his non-existent belly. Phil pales even more. Any whiter and he'd be a ghost himself. Technoblade quickly decides it's time to step in. "Listen, Charles, Poodwaddle, please. My mom calls me Charles. Or she did until, you know." The skeleton waggles his bony fingers. "Right." Technoblade trails off awkwardly into silence. "So how can I help you, Captain?" Poodwaddle's eyes, or rather, the odd lights within the depths of his skull, turn toward Phil. Or... They turn to Wilbur next. "I suppose you're the captain now, aren't you?" Wilbur flinches. "That's not... Sorry about that, by the way." Poodwaddle continues, turning back to Phil as though he hadn't heard Wilbur's protest at all. "Curse and all, thought it was just you. You know how it is. Ended up as just some old bones in the ocean anyway, so... No hard feelings?" Phil's mouth opens and closes silently, his throat bobbing. "Yeah?" His voice sounds weak, flat. "Sure, mate. No hard feelings." Poodwaddle grins, or at least Technoblade thinks he does. It's hard to tell when his head is just a literal skull, but the former pirate tips his head and gives a little salute that he's pretty sure is meant to be teasing. The second his back is turned, Technoblade sees his friend's expression crumple, his gaze darting away to study the ground with newfound intensity. Pootwaddle. Wilbur interjects, and Technoblade is momentarily surprised by the man's steady, confident tone, before he remembers that Wilbur was a captain, too, once. To this very same skeleton, no less. "We're here to break the curse." "Course you are," Pootwaddle chirps, waving him off. "Why else would you be here?" Wilbur blinks. "But how do you think you'll be breaking this curse, then?" Pootwaddle continues, as if Wilbur hadn't spoken at all. There's a funny tone to his voice, almost smug, as if he knows something they don't, and the thought unsettles Technoblade. With Eret, he'd never been teasing, but rather guiding, being mysterious in a way that was somehow comforting. This, on the other hand, is anything but. "We need to put the locket back," Wilbur answers confidently. "Oh, is that it?" The skeleton's eyes seem to glow, brighter, holding Wilbur's gaze without wavering, as if scrutinizing his very soul. Wilbur shifts uncomfortably beneath its intensity. "We need to return what we took," Phil interjects, stepping forward to stand side by side with Wilbur once more, some of the strength returning to his voice. "Right?" Pootwaddle doesn't answer Phil, doesn't even acknowledge him. He's still staring at Wilbur. "Is that it?" he repeats. Wilbur swallows. "Will?" Phil looks at his son with wide, questioning eyes, and for a long moment he's silent. And then something seems to dawn on him, a look of understanding crossing his face, along with something sad. "You still have it?" Wilbur nods, small and stiff. His hand is at his belt, where a single pistol rests comfortably in its holster. "I didn't want you to see it. Not after what happened," he explains quietly. Technoblade remembers it vividly, the way Phil had flinched violently away from Wilbur's hand when he'd held Tommy's weapon. "I tried to get rid of it. I tried to throw it into the sea, and it brought the Navy down on us. A warship, just like Dreams, against a tiny little sloop. We didn't stand a chance against them." Phil hums a soft acknowledgement, his hand lifting to rest on the young man's shoulder, his smile a little strained even as he murmurs gentle comforts. "It's okay, mate. I understand. I know you can't get rid of it no matter how hard you try. I tried to get rid of the locket, too, and, well, we saw how well that went." Wilbur's eyes flicker with dawning understanding, but he still looks conflicted. "It's my fault the sticks went down." Phil grimaces. "We all stole from the island, Will. We were all cursed from the moment we stepped off its damned shores. The others paid with their lives, but we don't have to. We have a chance to make things right again." "Not if you keep this up," Pootwaddle interrupts. "I don't think you want to find out what happens if you stick around too long." "What happens?" Ronbu asks tentatively. Pootwaddle doesn't answer, just raises his bony fingers and gives them another waggle. Ronbu flinches. "Better move on," the skeleton says, crooking his head at Wilbur. "What say you, Captain?" "I'm not the captain." "No?" Pootwaddle's fiery gaze sweeps over the rest of the crew, looking them up and down as they squirm beneath his gaze. He laughs quietly at the sight of the kids huddled together, before turning on Eret, who lifts his chin as if he can feel his gaze. "Fascinating," the skeleton says. "You made a sacrifice." "I did." Eret's voice is strong. "Was it worth it?" "I hope it will be." Pootwaddle nods, apparently satisfied, and then his glowing eyes flicker to Technoblade, and he immediately straightens. There's no expression to read, not on a skeleton, but Technoblade gets a distinct feeling that he's known somehow. As if this skeleton can truly see him, just as Eric can. All of his strengths and weaknesses laid bare. Captain? Technoblade nods, slowly. A Navy man turned pirate. Poodwaddle's voice is heavy with curiosity, his head tilting as he studies Technoblade like some sort of exhibit. Now what made you decide to do that? Technoblade spares a glance at his crew. They're all watching with bated breath, clearly unnerved, shoulders stiff and eyes wide. He catches Phil's gaze, and his heart is warmed by the look of amusement he sees there, amidst the storm of other emotions. It's a question they've asked each other time and time again, and one he's never really been able to answer. Nevertheless, the skeleton seems to have found his answer, because he tips his head back and laughs, the sound echoing across the empty field of bones. What's so funny? Technoblade asks, lifting a brow with a frown. You are! Poodwaddle says around a chuckle, fanning his face with a spare hand he'd picked up from the pile beside him. You're fascinating, Captain. I can't wait to see how this story ends. And then his laughter quiets down, his chuckles dying off into quiet wheezes until he's calmed himself enough to speak in a voice far more serious than before. But enough of all this. You have a curse to break, and no time to waste. Best get a move on, if you want any chance of succeeding. We don't exactly know where we're going, Technoblade cautiously admits. So what you're saying is you need a guide? The skeleton leans forward, leering over them. You need someone to take you to the heart of the island? Reluctantly, Technoblade nods. Well, why didn't you just say so? Poodwaddle straightens with a clap of his skeletal hands, his tone brightening. One tour of the Bone Zone coming right up. The journey isn't far. In fact, it feels as though they must have walked past it a dozen times in their wandering. Poodwaddle navigates the terrain like it's home, entertaining them all the while with poor jokes and mildly horrifying tales of his own death. The crew is silent, nobody daring to stop him. There's a growing feeling of nervous anticipation with every step, each one of them beginning to realize just how close they are to their destination, and just how dangerous things could be. On an island where the laws of nature seem to be failing, Technoblade has no idea just what awaits them on the other side should they fail. An eternity of emptiness, condemned to guide others to their fate like Poodwaddle? Or perhaps even worse. He tries not to think about it too much. We're here. Technoblade stops so suddenly, Phil nearly bumps into him from behind, his friend voicing a soft noise of concern as he moves to pass him. The heart of the island is through the gateway, Poodwaddle says, and for once, there is no humor in his voice. He fixes them all with a long, searching look. I don't know what you'll find there, but I hope you're able to break free. There's something sorrowful about the way he says that, but he leaves no time to dwell on it. He turns to face Wilbur, then Phil, and then finally Technoblade. Good luck, Captain. And the skeleton gives them one last crude imitation of a salute, before crumbling. Like water, his bones spill across the ground, as though his very soul has been severed, and every connection along with it. The skeleton's remains bump and roll and rattle until they're no more than a small heap on the ground. Just like the rest they've been walking on. Phil makes a soft, strangled noise behind him. Oh, gods. Wilbur, crouched beside him, is silent. His horrified face speaks louder than any words could. Phil's eyes are fixed on the ground, on the bones beneath his feet. He's got one hand clasped over his mouth, his face rapidly paling, his shoulders shuddering as he tries to step back. Unblinking, he stares at a tattered scrap of cloth amidst the ivory fragments, and then at a worn boot, half buried beneath the remains of a broken tibia. And slowly, Technoblade begins to understand his panic, because he, too, is seeing objects he recognizes. Familiar scraps of cloth tucked amidst the rubble. Clothing he can match to faces, to names. His crew. These skeletons are their fallen crews. Technoblade staggers back, covering his own mouth as his stomach heaves with immediate revulsion and horror. His knees wobble, his feet stuttering, and then he's falling back, bones snapping beneath him as he crashes to the ground. What the fuck? Wilbur cries out, half bracing Phil and half struggling to stand himself. Shit. Tommy mutters, his face ghastly pale as every step backward just shatters more bones beneath his feet. These are people, oh gods, what the hell? As if it wasn't obvious before. They'd all thought it, surely, but they'd all clung desperately to a fool's hope. Animals, surely, not people. And yet skulls stare back at them now. So close they can no longer pretend, and the proof of their worst nightmares has come to light, and there's nowhere to turn that they can't see it. Technoblade's heart is in his throat, his nausea growing by the second, but he takes one look at his panicked crew and pushes himself back to his feet. His legs tremble beneath him, every motion taking more energy than he has to spare, every instinct screaming at him to look down. But he ignores it, swallowing back the terror and guilt and anguish, and replacing it with the calm mask of a leader. For once, he's grateful for the lessons the Navy taught him, for the way he'd been schooled time and time again on how to suppress even the strongest, wildest emotions. His crew needs him, not his shock or his sorrow, but his level head and his calm confidence. "Eyes on me," he orders, his voice cutting harshly through the panicked gasps and cries. The world goes silent, every head turning his way, even Phil's, his blue eyes glassy and dazed, looking every bit as overwhelmed as Technoblade himself feels. "Nobody look down. Keep your eyes on me and keep moving. The curse wants us to panic. We can't give it that. Not when we're this close." He gets a few shaky nods, some soft murmurs rising up from their scattered party. He's quick to make his way to Phil's side, squeezing the crook of his friend's shoulder. "Are you okay?" he asks, and gods, he's getting sick of having to ask Phil that question. Phil gives a shaky nod and a wobbly smile, gripping Technoblade's arm so tight it hurts. "Right, I don't believe that for a second, but it's not like I have any other options right now. You think you can hold out till this is all over?" Phil grits his teeth and nods again. "Yeah." His voice is gravelly, thick with unshed tears. Technoblade's heart aches for him. He wants to mourn just as much as Technoblade does, because even if these people had betrayed him, they'd once been his crew, his family. But there's no time to cry for the fallen. Not now. Not here. "Yeah, mate, just... you lead the way. I'll be right next to you." Technoblade gives him a weak smile and a nod, and turns his face toward the arch. It's a terrible sight. The ribs of a whale stretching above them like some terrible tunnel. Within it is a patch of fog so dense that nothing can be seen beyond, no matter how close to it Technoblade gets. "Right. Everyone, hang on to one another. Don't let go. Form a chain." His order is quick to be obeyed, Phil's fingers intertwining with his, Wilbur on his other side, with Tommy and the others not far behind. His grip on Phil's hand tightens as he begins to move forward with trepidation, his other hand lifted to shield his eyes as if to help peer through the mist. "Whatever is through that tunnel, we stick together. Keep close and don't stray," he commands, casting one last look back at his crew. "We can get through this, together." and then they walk through the tunnel, one at a time, with Technoblade leading the way into the abyss. There's nothing at first, just a wall of fog, so dense it's dizzying, with no way to tell which direction is right or left. He can barely see his feet beneath him, nor his hand in front of his face. All he can do is hope he isn't leading the crew into some awaiting chasm, ready to swallow them up just as the mist has. He can hear shallow, nervous breathing behind him, half muffled by the mist, nobody daring to speak for fear of disturbing some greater horror. And then it clears. There's no warning, just a sudden, abrupt ability to see, a cave carved out of the mist as if with a cleaver. He's quick to urge his crew forward, bundling them all safely together at the side of the circle as he carefully ensures each one of them is still present. The kids are shaken, but determined. Jack and Nikki side by side as they glare out into the mist, ready for any danger that might try to get the jump on their party. Errett is with the kids, his hand on Ronbu's shoulder, his gaze half-lidded and brow furrowed in thought. He looks concerned, and that's enough to set Technoblade's instincts into overdrive, the hair on the back of his neck raising as he whirls to scan their surroundings for a threat. There's nothing. Just an empty space, the ground beneath their feet still a ghostly white. A void, just the same island they've been seeing all this time, just an endless sprawl of bone. Save for one thing. A single chest sits atop the bones. Old wood, half rotted with time, its hinges rusty and worn. It's already open, no lock to be found, and within, a heap of gold and jewels can be seen, glittering in the light of the lanterns. The crew is silent for a moment longer as they, too, notice. Where they once might have delighted in the sight of such riches, the air around them is heavy and wrong, and there's something eerie about the treasure the longer Technoblade stares at it. Something about it is unsettling, though he can't point his finger at what, and he knows without a doubt that it is not to be touched or tampered with. "Stay back," he says, finally breaking the crew free of their hesitant silence. "Nobody get close, don't touch it." That's... Wilbur sounds strangled. That's all the treasure we had left on the ship. The sticks, before she went down. Phil hisses his acknowledgement from between clenched teeth. He's got the locket in one hand now, golden chains draping between his fingers, the mechanism popped open to reveal the inside. He's still got Wilbur's old portrait within, and Technoblade watches as he studies it for a moment, as though conflicted. There's only a slight shake to his hands to betray his nerves as he and Wilbur walk side by side toward the open chest, staring down at its contents with conflicted expressions. Wilbur's hand slowly drifts toward his hip, toward the holster on his belt, though he doesn't draw his pistol quite yet. They stand over the chest for a moment, silent. And then... "Guess we're meant to put it back now." Phil's voice is surprisingly steady. Technoblade watches his friend's throat bob, his shoulders squaring as he stares down his fate. "Guess so," Wilbur echoes. And neither move. A silent question passes between them. "Right. You first, Will?" Phil breathes. "I started this. I need to be the one to finish it." His voice is shaky, but his gaze is strong as he stares at the chest, raw determination painting his face. Wilbur nods solemnly. With a surprisingly steady hand, he pulls the pistol free from its holster, and for the first time, Technoblade is able to get a good look at it. It's truly a work of master craftsmanship, finely polished wood inlaid with intricate gold details. He understands why Wilbur would have claimed it, why he would have held on to it for so long, even without the curse, but Wilbur's gaze holds nothing but disdain for it. Without any hesitation, he tosses it onto the top of the pile of coins in one swift motion. Phil is next. He readies himself with a shaky breath, holding the locket above the chest and watching it sway steadily from side to side. His eyes are wide and slightly glazed, and the tremble in his hands is back with full force. But Wilbur's hand on his shoulder is steady, and he leans forward to murmur something in his father's ear that Technoblade doesn't quite catch. It makes Phil smile. His grip starts to slip, his fingers slackening their grip, the chain dropping the locket further and further, and then at the last second it stops. "Forgot something," Phil says, and pops the locket open. Carefully, slowly, he pulls the tiny portrait free from within, cradling it in his palm. He studies it for a moment, his expression soft and contemplative. Then he smiles again and tucks it carefully in the pocket over his heart. "Not ready to give that up just yet," he murmurs, and next to him, Wilbur looks close to tears, his smile wobbly and relieved. And then Phil steels himself, and with one last steadying breath, glares down at the locket that's taken from him again and again, his ship, his crew, his confidence, and nearly his son. "Go to hell." The locket drops with a clink into the chest. For a moment there's silence, the universe collectively holding its breath. Phil stands motionless, eyes squeezing shut, lips mouthing a silent, desperate plea. And then all hell breaks loose. There's a roaring sound, not unlike thunder in the heart of a storm. It sounds like the very world itself is ripping apart at the seams, accompanied by an awful rattling sound as the island's foundations shake and shiver beneath them, sending bone piles cascading down. The tunnel behind them crackles and falls, splintering into a dozen pieces, the fog around them swirling and threatening to envelop them all. The crew huddles together, Phil and Wilbur rushing back toward the rest of them with outstretched hands. They're pulled into the midst as the crew of the Argo forms a tight circle, bracing themselves for whatever threat awaits them. Behind him, Errett suddenly gasps. "Something's wrong." He breathes, and his eyes are wide, his face pale. "Something's terribly wrong. I can't feel them anymore. I can't see." Technoblade's blood runs cold. There's an awful shriek, a keening wail that rips through the thunder, everything else dull in comparison to the piercing, mournful cry. Beside him, Phil doubles over, clutching his hands over his ears, and he can hear the confused shouts and agonized hisses as the rest of his crew follows suit. The sound seems to resonate on and on and on, his very bones aching as the pitch increases, and even his hands can't block out the awful, haunting wail as the volume continues to rise, his thoughts muddling into nothing until it stops. There's only silence now, and as Technoblade raises his head, he sees that the fog has cleared. All that's left is a fine mist at their ankles, rippling like the surface of the water, hiding the ground from view. That, and the sky, now a muted gray, the same shade as the mist, sprawling as far as the eye can see, with no sign of the ocean in sight. It's suddenly as if they aren't on an island at all, but rather another world entirely. There's no sound, not the thunderous rumble or the wailing cries. Nothing at all, save for their ragged breathing and muted whispers. Everything is still. And then, "Hey, Captain," a youthful voice calls. Technoblade's heart skips a beat. He looks up, and into the ghostly face of his former cabin boy.